So as soon as I get the vice moderator and co-chair the diaconis and those people that sit down. For those of you that haven't been here before to a worship service, and you think, is it always like this? Yes, it is. It's one of the best things about it. The Christmas trees packed away, and the poinsettias are packed away, and Mary and Joseph and the baby and the wise men are off from in front of the pulpit, and the church is not decorated in Advent blue or in red and gold and Christmas Eve colors. We're back to what's called ordinary times. And the liturgical color for that, which it took me years to know what that was, it's green. So we're back where we spend the vast majority of our time in those ordinary days. And I think that it's really important that we kind of continue the timeline in Jesus' life and ministry. We had Advent and the anticipation of his birth in Bethlehem, and we celebrated on Christmas Eve his birth, and then last week we celebrated Epiphany when the wise men made it to Bethlehem and brought the gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And then I talked to you about Mary presenting him in the temple and the prophecies that were made. They had to leave. At that time it was Palestine, now it's Israel. But they had to leave, and they were refugees. They were refugees in Egypt. And then they were called back. The angel told Joseph that the family would be safe. He could come back, but they didn't go back to the Jerusalem area. They went to Nazareth. And last week I said, when Jesus' parents had fulfilled all the requirements of the law, they returned home to Nazareth in Galilee. There the child became a strong, robust lad and was known for his wisdom beyond his years, and God poured out his blessings upon him. This is what happens next. This is from the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of Luke, beginning with the 41st verse. When Jesus was 12 years old, he accompanied his parents to Jerusalem for the annual Passover festival, which they attended each year. After the celebration was over, they started home to Nazareth, but Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't miss him the first day, for they assumed he was with friends among the other travelers. But when he didn't show up that evening, they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. And when they couldn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to search for him there. 3 days later, they finally discovered him. He was in the temple, sitting among the teachers of the law, discussing deep questions with them, and amazing everyone with his understanding and answers. I'm sure that all of us at some point in time have questioned our parenting skills. Are we being too protective? We don't want to be helicopter parents. You know about this term? Helicopter parents, because you're hovering. You know about free-range parenting? That's what they're calling it now. When you actually let your kids out of the yard. And well, but this is a wonderful example to help us feel a little bit better. Mary and Joseph misplaced the Son of God for 3 days. Now, here's how this happens. When people traveled in this part of the world, and at this time, the women would start out first. And they started out first because they couldn't travel as fast as the men, and because they had to take all the stuff with them. They would take all of they didn't have, I told you about the innkeeper and that story in Bethlehem, and that the inn wasn't a holiday inn. Well, there wasn't a Denny's next to it. So the women still had to cook and take care of the family, So they were loaded down with things, and now they're headed back, and Joseph thinks that Jesus is with Mary's family and friends, and Mary thinks he's with Joseph's family and friends, and it wasn't until the next night that they found out he wasn't with either one. Can you just imagine what that must be like? I lost my daughter in a mall for about 30 minutes, and I just went nuts. I was very familiar with the mall manager, and I wanted her to just shut down the whole mall until we found her. And I found her, she was across the hall, and she wandered into another store. But it was terrifying. So they go on the search. It takes them 3 days. They've got to travel. They're a day or day and a half outside Jerusalem. So they come back. Jerusalem's a big city. Where do you start? 3 days later, they find him. He's in the temple, of all places. Understand that in their culture, when you're 12, you have what in the Jewish faith is called a bar mitzvah. It's a rite of passage, and you're considered a man. We just don't have that in our culture. What could I give you? Maybe our driver's license. That when you get your driver's license, you're considered responsible, and you can be out on your own and that type of thing. But this is a bigger deal than that. You are looked upon. Jesus would have spent the first 12 years pretty much at Mary's side. And then after that, he would have gone to the carpenter shop with Joseph and done a man's work. So he's 12, but he's sitting with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, the leaders of the country and under the Romans, but the leaders of the faith, and they're amazed with his understanding and his answers. His parents didn't know what to think. "Son," his mother said to him, "why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere." "But why did you need to search?" he asked. "Didn't you realize I would be here in the temple in my father's house?" But they didn't understand what he meant. Now, there's a couple things going on here that I think it's really important to understand. Mary's really, really upset, and she reacts the way Barb and I have good friends that are Jewish, and this is the way. They didn't have a son; they had 3 daughters, but this is the way Pam reacted to everything. Being a Jewish mom, "Why have you done this to us? What did we ever do to deserve this? How awful!" And your father and I have been frantic, searching everywhere. Jesus said, "Chill out, Mom. Don't have a cow if you were Bart Simpson." Why did you get all upset? Why didn't you realize I'd be here in my father's house? Well, Joseph's house was probably over the carpenter shop in Nazareth. Think about this. At 12 years old, Jesus obviously knew who he is and who his father is. Joseph's not his dad. Technically, Joseph is his stepdad, which, for those of us that are in that role, in one way or another, really elevates stepdad. "Didn't you realize I'd be here in the temple in my father's house?" But they didn't understand what he meant. Then he returned to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them, and his mother stored away all these things in her heart. So Jesus grew both tall and wise and was loved by God and men. So he returns home, And this is the last we hear about him until he's 30. We know nothing about his teenage years. We don't know anything about him in his 20s or what he was like. Now, I can't do it here because there's too many of us, but I've done it a few times in Bible study, and I've asked, Jesus was 17 at one time, and probably went to Hebrew school. And as a young 17-year-old, would you have dated him? And if you would have, ladies, what do you think that it would have been like? How would that feel to date for somebody? And the answer I got back most of the time was very protective. And when you read through the Gospels, particularly in Luke, and you read about Jesus' relationship to women, all kinds of women, from his mom to Mary Magdalene, to the prostitute, to the woman that they brought to him that was going to be stoned for committing adultery, he was protective of all of them. If you're guys, would you hang out with them? Would he party? I don't know, he partied at the wedding in Cana. He's a good guy. And then you get goofy questions. Would he have been in the band or would he have been in the choir? No, he was cool. He was in the band.
I think he'd been the leader.
Yeah, there you go. He returned to a blue-collar family. I think sometimes we get the idea that they were desperately poor. And I don't, after all of these years of reading and rereading about them, they weren't wealthy. They didn't, because Joseph didn't own trade routes or what have you, but I think he made a decent living. Why did I mark this? Excuse me. I'll blame it on the medication. Here we are. This is the 13th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, starting with the 53rd verse. When Jesus had finished giving these illustrations and returned to his hometown, Nazareth in Galilee, he taught there in the synagogue and astonished everyone with his wisdom and miracles. Now, like I said, he's about 30 at this time. How is this possible, the people exclaimed. He's just a carpenter's son. And we know Mary, his mother, and his brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. And his sisters, they all live here. How can he be so great? And they became angry with him. And then Jesus told them, a prophet is honored everywhere except in his own country and among his own people. Think about this. Jesus grew up in a blended family. His brothers were actually his half-brothers. His sisters were his half-sisters. Let me give you another example of the relationship. Chapter 7 of the Gospel of John. Jesus went to Galilee, going from village to village, for he wanted to stay out of Judea, where the Jewish leaders were plotting his death. But soon it was time for the tabernacle ceremonies, one of the annual Jewish holidays, and Jesus' brothers urged him to go to Judea for the celebration. Listen to what they said. No more people can see your miracles, they scoffed. You can't be famous when you hide like this. If you're so great, prove it to the world. For even his brothers didn't believe. Sometimes we get a little impatient, perhaps, with people that we love and we want the best for, and we don't understand how they cannot accept Christ as Lord and Savior. When we've been trying to explain it to them and show them how much better life would be and all of those things that we try, and why don't they get it? Well, maybe we could just give them a break. His brothers didn't get it. His sisters didn't get it. The 12 apostles who were there with him for 3 years, they didn't get it either. He didn't get it either. Until the Holy Spirit joins with the person spirit, yours, mine, whoever we're talking about, no matter how well-meaning we are or how eloquent we are, it just isn't going to happen. But can you imagine what it would be like for his brothers and sisters growing up in a family where your parents believe your older brother's God? I know my brothers had a hard time with it. That should be funny. Except that one time my brother said he was going to write a book entitled Our Older Brother Was an Only Child. The purpose of this is to understand, and it's so important, I think. The Bible begins in the beginning. It doesn't begin once upon a time. Jesus was born in a real place at a real time to real people. When I prayed this morning and I said that, that you left all the glory of heaven to come here and understand what it's like to be us. Because he was us. He is the Christ incarnate, which means he's God in the flesh. He knows what it's like to be a teenager. He knows what it's like to be in your 20s. He knows what it's like to be loved. He knows what it's like to be hated. He knows what it's like to be stabbed in the back by somebody that's supposed to be your best friend. Judas Iscariot. When you come and bring a message of love and reconciliation and people crucify you for it, even if you're not physically crucified, you can be crucified in a lot of different ways. He understands that. When your grandkids or a niece or nephew or somebody that works, geez, nobody understands. He understands. And every once in a while we get blessed by being the other person that says, I understand. There are people that we spoke of this morning that I can say with all of my heart, I really care about what's going on with you. But if I haven't been through it, I can't say I understand. But you can. Because you've been down that road. And whatever road we find ourselves on, just know that we're not alone. That there's, even in those intervening years, there was a reason that he didn't start his ministry until he was 30. Amen? Amen. Okay.